Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Man cannot live on beans and rice alone. And that is why I talk so often, and probably to the point that it annoys some of you, on growing and raising your own food and being as self-sufficient as possible with your own food, so that you're not dependent upon a food system that is very delicate, extremely fragile, and that is very prone to collapse and have many failures with really just very little intrusion into that food supply system. And we've seen that over the past year with just the little bits of things that happen cause shortages and slowdowns and price increases, commodities all over the place. And yet everything that we're looking at shows that it's probably going to get worse. I want to show you some things and talk about a couple of things that have to do with the weather. And yes, this is about the grand solar minimum. And some of you really like these videos, and other ones I think you're kind of like, okay, get it, we get it, grand solar minimum. But I hope that if I talk about it enough and give you enough ideas and stuff, that many of you really start taking precautions for that. Did you know that this year, from January 1st up to April 19th, we had over 14,000 record low temperatures recorded in the United States. That's the most on record ever. And if you need to remember that time period is before last week, when a lot of the Midwest felt some really cold temperatures, and we got a couple of inches of snow here. So that those numbers, that over 14,000, would most likely be much more. This is unusual for, I guess, most of us. No one living has experienced a grand solar minimum, and we can only look back to history and see what we can learn from what happened in the past. And everything is kind of lining up. NASA, as much as mainstream science, mainstream media, government, that they don't want to admit this. They don't want to come right out and say, yes, grand solar minimum, it's legitimate, it's true. The data that they put out backs up everything, even NASA's data, the National Oceanic Organization, NOAA. They put out temperature datas and climatic datas, and it's showing that we're leading up to, and we're in the beginnings of, a grand solar minimum. This is something that we have to take seriously. Most preppers, or at least a lot of preppers, and included into that are homesteaders, a lot of their big plan for independence and survival, and just maybe not survival from the sense of like a TV show or a movie, but survival in the sense that you're not going to have to be caught up in the inflation of food prices, or the shortages of food, or the disruption of food supply chains, or even the manipulation of governments within the food supply system, and using food to compel you to bow down and kiss their ring. Which we're starting to kind of see that, and we're going to see it more. I saw one state, I believe it was Virginia, but I can't remember exactly, so don't hold me to that state. They're offering $100 savings bonds for people that get that in their arm. That's right. So they're incentivizing it, And eventually, as we've seen in certain other countries, we're going to start probably seeing, if you don't have this, and you don't have a little piece of paper or card or some type of identification proving that, then maybe your ability to acquire the goods that you need just isn't there until you line up like every other good little citizen. So that's why we want to be able to be, independent in our food, so that we don't have to rely on those systems. It's also healthier. The long-term financial effects is better. It's better on your pocketbook. The initial cost of gardening and animals and stuff sure is high, but over a long period of time, it definitely pays for itself. The problem is, though, is we're entering into a grand solar minimum. And a grand solar minimum that's going to most likely affect the climate and the growing patterns and the growing seasons for pretty much everyone at the 45th latitude and above. And that's most of the United States. We're going to, like we're already seeing, we're seeing colder weather later in the season. Virtually every continent right now over the past couple of weeks has recorded either late winter season cold or early winter season cold. For the southern hemisphere that's heading towards their winter season, they're starting to see snowfalls and cold temperatures a month to a month and a half before they normally would. And for the northern hemisphere, they're seeing where we're in spring and we're heading towards summer, we're seeing places that are still getting cold weather like we did here, a week and a half ago. They're predicting another cold freeze for most of Europe this coming weekend and into the first part of the week. They shouldn't be getting those cold temperatures right now. Last week there was snowfall in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, places that would not normally see these kind of cold temperatures at this time of the year, but we're seeing it, and that's because we're in a grand solar minimum. I don't know how else to emphasize how serious a grand solar minimum can be. We're not talking about some grand apocalyptic thing that's going to cause the extermination of our species, of species. But what we're talking about is because of the globalization of food systems, because of the monoculture and crop growing, because the entire food supply system really just kind of stands on a knife's edge, and it's a very fragile system, that something as small, even though it's not small, as the changing of temperatures and climates and growing seasons can cause catastrophic damage. There's even historical evidence that past grand solar minimums greatly affected civilization. There's some scientists that believe that the rise and fall of dynasties in China and throughout the Middle East could have been greatly affected by the solar minimums and maximums of the ancient history. And so if it affected people back then that way, how much more is it going to affect us today when our systems are so interconnected and so really deeply fragile? Even though we have all this technology and we have all this vast modern farming, it actually, if you get into it, it actually makes these systems a lot weaker than you think. They're much more dependent on the whole system working. Whereas in the past, if one part of the country wasn't working right, or if one part of the country or region failed because of whatever reason, it may not have affected the entire nation or the entire world. But today that's not the case. One part of a country or region or planet that may fail and collapse within their food supply system, it can cause catastrophic damages all across the planet because everything is globalized. And so because of that, looking at over the next 10, 20, and even 30 years of dealing with a grand solar minimum, most scientists say that we could be looking at this well into the 2045 to 2050 time period. So we're looking at, 20 to 30 years time period. It could greatly, catastrophically damage food supply systems. In fact, there's certainly a lot of evidence. I won't go into it in this video because I've covered it in the past and it's a lengthy subject, that a lot of this great reset that we're seeing from the World Economic Forum and the Agenda 2030 from the United Nations and all this net zero climate initiatives could in fact be they're being done because these agencies, these governments have predicted and seen, because of their the science and the data that they're privy to, have known that this is going to happen over the past decade or so. And so they've been preparing everyone for it by trying to get nations to adapt these initiatives to kind of circumvent the damage that could be caused because of the grand solar minimum. Your food supply is critical. If your food is controlled, then the people are controlled. That's just a known fact. And we've talked about this over the past few days with Biden pushing, eating synthetic meat, or the reduction of eating of red meat, the reduction of just food-based or animal-based products, anything that comes from an animal, the great reduction of that. This net zero, carbon net zero that they're pushing will greatly reduce and control just how normal agriculture works. We're seeing bills being proposed in various states that will greatly intrude upon just traditional agriculture, whether it's meat producers, milk producers, or vegetable producers. Take all this together and you put it with or next to what's going on with the grand solar minimum, folks. We need to get serious about this. That's why you need to be practicing and growing as much as possible, collecting your seeds. I've talked about things like high tunnels and greenhouses. Even if you can't do that, maybe because of money, start putting back things like plastic sheeting, saving milk jugs, stuff like that, so that at least, if nothing else, you can place them over garden plants. And they do make other products that you can purchase, or that you can collect to put over garden plants to protect them if you have a late season freeze. Things to protect fruit trees. Here on the property this past week, the snow and the freeze that we've gotten, it really damaged a lot of our fruit trees, and I don't expect us to have a very good year because after checking on them, most of the fruit trees, there was only one, and I think it was just because it was kind of shielded by some other larger trees, that it seemed like most all the blooms were completely intact. But most of the other fruit trees, 50 to probably 90% of the blooms, because it was already in bloom, were completely frozen and damaged due to the freeze. So I don't really expect us to have a very good harvest this year on fruit trees. And it's an example of how we weren't prepared for that. We weren't prepared to deal with fruit trees being damaged because of this late season freeze. So these are the kind of things that you have to get ready for, and you may not need them right now. You may not need enough plastic sheeting to cover your garden, or sheets, or things to keep your fruit trees from getting frozen right now. But you can collect that stuff, purchase it, whatever you do, and put it back, so that maybe next year or the year after, or whatever it is, you have it available. For instance, greenhouse plastic sheeting is becoming harder to find, and it's becoming much more expensive for various reasons. One reason is people are waking up and they're buying it. But it also because of some of the supply chain shortages and stuff and manufacturing, it's just not as readily available right at this moment. So there has been some hiccups. The big freeze that they had down in Texas, down in Houston, kind of slowed down some of those the plastic production at the plants down there, and so that's part of the reason why greenhouse sheeting is a little expensive right now. Will it get better? Will the prices go back down, the supply go back up? It's possible. But if you can get a hold of it, it wouldn't hurt to, along with other items that you might need. Like I said, you may not need it this year. But I wouldn't advise. This is my personal advice, because this is what we're doing here. If I'm thinking, well, I don't need that stuff this year, things are probably looking okay, but I'll put that on the list for in the next few years to purchase. Well, if the next few years happens and you're not able to get to it, or your money doesn't buy as much because of increased inflation or whatever reason, then you're going to be hurting. So just like we prep with our food, I suggest prepping for protecting your food systems on your property with the items that you need for cold weather, excessive snow and cold, maybe extra rain or lack of rain, whatever it is. You need to kind of prepare for that, because everything is looking like all these predictions that we've been hearing, many of us have been hearing for the last 5 years about the grand solar minimum. it's all starting to line up, and it seems like this year more than ever it's happening. You know, one other thing, there's now been 50 volcanic eruptions on the planet since the first of the year, and in an average year, an average 12-month period year, there's usually only 30. And some of those volcanic eruptions were quite massive and put out a lot of ash. Well, all that ash that's being put out can also reflect sun back into space and cause the planet to cool a little bit. And the increased volcanic eruptions and earthquakes is also another byproduct of a grand solar minimum. You have a reduced electromagnetic activity of the sun, which causes it to happen here on the planet, and it causes the Earth's crust, the plates, to kind of move around, and it can cause earthquakes and volcanoes to become more active. And in fact, that's exactly what we've seen happen this year. So, you know, for those that are naysayers, for those that think it's just some crazy conspiracy, how can you explain all this? How can you explain that everything that we've been learning for the last several years of what a grand solar minimum is and how it works and what it's going to look like is actually happening? And science really has no other explanation for it, and most scientists are just trying to ignore it. And I think because it doesn't fit within the mainstream narrative. The mainstream narrative is that there's man-made global warming and we need to tax everyone for it. We need to restrict everyone's rights because of man-made global warming. And the grand solar minimum doesn't really fit their narrative. So anyways, before I go off on another tirade, get your house in order also means getting your gardens in order, your food supply systems, your animals, whatever it is, because you need to prepare for this grand solar minimum, folks. In the next few years, we could start seeing some very drastic changes in our climate and our weather patterns and growing seasons and growing cycles. So take the time now to figure out what it is you need. You know, every farm, every situation's different, but figure out the things that you need that could help you survive this and get past this and thrive during a grand solar minimum, because I'm afraid it's here, and I don't think that there's anything that we can do about it except just prepare. All right, folks, while you're at it in your preparations, if for those of you that's lasted to the end, if you want to go to preparewithtravis.com, I've teamed up with My Patriot Supply, and they offer some amazing good quality and value products. This is freeze-dried emergency food. I recommend everyone having at least a couple of buckets of it put away to add to your already existing prepping supplies, because this stuff has a very long shelf life, and it's very easy to cook and to deal with for emergencies. And you can go to preparewithtravis.com and pick you up some for a very good price. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.